When I bought this table saw, it came with a homemade cart. The previous owner built a switch into it, which worked fine enough, but the plug-in was a dangerous-looking monstrosity. I could just replace the power cord, but I took this opportunity to improve on the power supply design overall. I wanted to move the toggle switch from the side to the front of the saw for easier reach, and I wanted to power both my shop vac and the saw at the same time when using the saw, so I planned to wire up a duplex outlet with a separate toggle switch. I needed to connect the outlet to the switch. I didn't want to sacrifice any length of the replacement power cord, so I looked at what I had laying around. The old cord was no good as it wasn't grounded. This spare cord for my LED lighting project was only 18 gauge, which wasn't enough for this purpose. I had some 12-2 romex left over for my garage wiring project, which would work just fine. I prepared the romex by stripping a few inches of sheathing off the end of it, and I prepared the workbox for the wires to come in, knocking out a hole and attaching a non-metallic cable clamp connector. I double-checked how an end-of-run receptacle was wired. Turns out it's the easiest method of receptacle wiring. Only one group of wires come into the box, and you just connect the wires to the terminals directly. No pigtails or other tricks needed. Bend each of the wire ends a full 180 degrees, and attach them to their respective terminals. White to the silver terminal, black to brass, and ground to green. Make sure your wire bends clockwise when attaching so that the terminal screw keeps the wire secure as it tightens. Time to work on the toggle switch box. I was reusing the old box, so I already had the holes knocked out and the cable clamps attached. I just needed to bring in each set of wires into the box, first for the power cord, then the romex, after stripping back some sheathing. I chose a paddle switch over a typical toggle for ease of turning on and off. This saw is only connected to power when actively being used, so bumping the switch on accident when not in use is not an issue for me. When I went to pigtail the ground wires together, I realized I needed more of the power cord wires unsheathed before proceeding. This is called a middle-of-run switch, and it's also the easiest of its type to wire. Pigtail the ground wire from the switch to the two ground wires, and connect the white wires inside the box to pass through. For the toggle, attach a black wire to each terminal. Before I fixed it to the saw, I wanted to test to make sure it worked and was wired properly. I plugged in my receptacle tester and as a precaution, was very careful to avoid touching anything but the plastic switch face. It was time to mount it all up. First I marked where I wanted the screws for the switch box in the front leg. Then I pre-drilled and screwed the box on. The switch wasn't threading into the old box very easily. I realized the box's tabs were angled outward, so I hammered them in with my lineman's pliers, which allowed me to screw the switch in. Confident after my receptacle test that everything was set up correctly, I screwed on the faceplate of the switch before moving on to the outlet box. When I chose the romex scrap, I didn't formally measure anything to make sure it was the right length for this project. I got really lucky that the scrap piece was basically the right length. I reused this hook on the leg side to coil up the table saw's power cord for a cleaner look. With everything affixed, I tested it all out. I got quite a shock when turning on the power, so the first thing I checked was to make sure that the outlet was still properly grounded. That was ruled out, so I opened up the switch box to investigate. After poking around, I noticed the switch's ground wire was loose. I tightened that up and hoped it'd fix the problem. Test number 2 had me nervous. Thankfully it was without issue, so I fixed the cover again and for my sanity, tested again. The last thing to do was affix a wire staple to keep the romex from catching on anything. I didn't have as much luck using alignments as a hammer this time around, so I gave in and chose the right tool for the job. I got another shock testing it a few days later, so I decided to ground the switch box, which I probably should have done from the outset. While the box was open, I decided to cover the open holes with electrical tape to keep out debris. Again a little gun shy, I did more tests with my non-contact voltage detector. My research says these shocks are likely static electricity buildup. The grounding of the box should take care of any of that, but I'll be keeping an eye on it during future projects. I've got a plan to improve my dust collection for the table saw, and this is just step one. For now, it's great to have a single switch to control the saw and the shop vac.